Hey guys, here's Gen Chem 1, Chapter 1, Problem number 3. This chart is asking you to put a check mark in the box for each symbol. And they want to know if the symbol fits the definition, and the definitions are atom, molecule, element, compound, and ionic compound. So remember that ionic compounds and compounds are really the same, except for ionic compound specifically means that it's a metal and a nonmetal. A compound means that it's made up of more than one type of atom. That means it will have more than one chemical symbol in it. And an element is something that has only one chemical symbol in it. A molecule is anything that has more than one atom. So that means that it will have either two different chemical symbols, or it will have one chemical symbol with more than one unit. So it'll have a subscript, a number with it. And an atom is something that only has a single chemical symbol, and it only has one of those units. Now, there could be a little bit of a confusion between the definition of molecule and compound and ionic compound. So some chemistry professors will say that there is a difference between a molecule and an ionic compound, because a molecule and ionic compound, in a little bit more sophisticated explanation, ionic compounds aren't really put together the same way that a covalent molecule is. But some faculty and some chemistry teachers will say we can use the words interchangeably. For this particular example, I'm going to use molecules to mean only covalently bonded compounds. And so I'm going to, since there is an ionic compound column, I will make sure to differentiate between the two. So let's get cracking. What do we have here? The first row is O2. So it's got one chemical symbol, oxygen, and there's two of them. It's got a subscript 2. So that means it's not an atom. It's not an atom because it's got more than one. It's got a subscript of 2. But it is a molecule. It is a molecule because of that same reason. A molecule has more than one unit, whether it's two different chemical symbols or more than one of the same chemical symbol. And so it does fit that definition. It also fits the definition of element since there's only one type of chemical symbol. It's only got oxygen in it. It is not a compound for that same reason, right? If a compound has to have two different types of elemental symbols, and since it only has oxygen, it's not going to fit that definition. It's not an ionic compound. Remember, an ionic compound will be a metal and a nonmetal. And later on, we're going to talk about polyatomic ions. You'll know that it's an ionic compound if it has a polyatomic ion in it as well. But right now in chapter 1, you don't have to worry about polyatomic ions. So just look for metals and nonmetals. Chlorine 2, you're going to run into Cl2, chlorine. You're in the same situation that you were with O2 for oxygen gas. It's not an atom because there's 2, the subscript 2. It is a molecule for the same reason. There's 2 of them. It's an element because all there is chlorine, and it's not a compound for that same reason. Because all it has is chlorine, it's not an ionic compound, not a metal and a nonmetal. So let's take a look at water, H2O. It's not an atom because it has not only more than one chemical symbol, it's got 3 units total. 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, that's 3 total units. So it's not an atom, but it is a molecule because it has more than 1 total units. Again, 3. It isn't an element in this case because it's got both hydrogen and oxygen. An element only has 1 type of symbol. For that same reason, it is a compound. And again, not a metal and a nonmetal, so it isn't an ionic compound. So let's look at sodium chloride. It's not an atom because, again, it's got sodium and chlorine in it. So it can't be an atom. It's got more than 1 chemical symbol. Is it a molecule? Well, remember, this is where some chemistry teachers will differ. They might say, yeah, sure, it's got more than 1 unit. It's got a sodium and a chlorine, so it's a molecule. And sometimes you'll hear all of us say, we'll refer to it as a sodium chloride molecule. But remember, in this definition, I'm going to go ahead and not call it a molecule because it's specifically an ionic compound because it's made of sodium and chlorine, a metal and a nonmetal. And because I've got both of those columns, let's be a little bit more precise. It's not an element because, again, it's got sodium and chlorine. It's got to have only 1 symbol. But we can call it a compound, right? If it's an ionic compound, then of course it would meet the definition of a compound. It's got sodium and chlorine in it. All right, let's take a look at C2H6O, good old ethanol. It's not an atom. It's got carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. It is a molecule because it's got more than one unit. Look, it's got 2 carbons, 6 hydrogens, and 1 oxygen. That's a total of 9 different atoms together in the grouping. So that's what, when we have that situation, it is a molecule. It isn't an element because it has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. It's got more than one chemical symbol. And because it's got more than one chemical symbol, it is a compound. It's not a metal. It's not made of any metals or metals together with nonmetals. So it's not an ionic compound. Okay, let's take a look at the last one. Fe, solid, iron. Look, all there is iron. It's one unit. It's got, the subscript is understood to be 1, and it's the only chemical symbol there. So I can definitely call that an atom. Because it's an atom, it's not a molecule. Because it only has iron in it, I can call it an element. Because it only has iron in it, it is definitely not a compound. And if it's not a compound, it can't be an ionic compound either. Okay.